So some troubling news for you if you happen to live in some areas that were designated as flood zones in the city. And, we've been through this now at least 3 or 4 times in the last, say, 7 or 8 years. The number of Greater Montreal homes now in flood zones has doubled. Now, this is according to basically a new way to figure out, a new way to determine whether you're in a flood zone or not. And this has nearly doubled to 20,000 homes. Jim Beis is the mayor of Pierrefonds-Roxboro. We have talked from time to time about a lot of different issues when it comes to flooding, Jim. But this new report, so walk me through this, because what I'm trying to understand is there were public consultations on this before it was released. Is there an issue as to why they were so early and we're only finding out now it's in the report? How does this work?
Hello, Aaron. Thank you for having me again. And look, I'll just go very briefly back in history. The government established certain criteria that was based on science and potential future flooding in all sectors of Quebec, and then mandated, in our case, we're fortunate to have the CMM, which is the Montreal Metropolitan Community,
right,
that have the resources to create these maps. And so this is the result of that work that took place. Now these maps have come down, which in our case, we have approximately 1,800 properties, let's say, doors, if you will, multiplexes, single-family homes, businesses, compared to about 500 that we had in the initial map for flooding. So you can see that just for our borough, we've added 1,300 doors that in most cases were never, ever flooded before. I mean, I walked about this morning through an area that is so far from any potential flooding or any past flooding that we ever had. And I asked myself, well, why do they do this? I mean, the new generation of maps here replaces, for example, the 0-20-year floodplain, 20-100-year floodplain, without getting technical. That was the criteria that we worked with. Now they have these variables that talk about the probability of being flooded in a 25-year window, let's say. And not only that, it goes even as far as saying that if you are flooded within these 25 years, well, it will also depend on the level or the amount of water that you have on your property, which then puts you on these 4 categories of extreme risk, high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. And then according to those risks will be criteria which will allow you or not to do anything to your property as you move forward. So for a community like ours, I mean, it's devastating because already we know there's an issue for folks obtaining proper insurance with policies that have the clauses for flooding, number one. The other thing, too, is we know already the banking institutions have already clearly indicated that it's difficult now for you to even get a mortgage if you don't belong to that bank for those areas. And thirdly, they're talking about potential devaluing of properties. When we talk about devaluing, the government has said, well, it's only going to be 4% potentially of the value of your home. But wait a second. If you can't get insurance, if you're having trouble getting a mortgage, and you can't sell your house, well, I would like to think that it'd be more than 4%. And there is zero responsibility taken by the government. And what I think is happening here, the government just wants to say, well, we don't want any responsibility on this. Everybody has to fend for themselves. Understanding, that climate change being what it is, we have to make sure we identify maps and make people know that they live within these zones. But then what are we doing for them to help them, try to protect themselves or even sell their houses if the time comes?
I have a couple of questions here. My first question, I guess, has to do with what you suggested here, that suddenly we've had this gigantic increase, right? When you go to 20,000, and you mentioned what it is out where you are, right? From originally how many?
From 500, we're at 1,800.
1,800, right. My question then would be, and this is my conspiracy theory, but help me out here, Jim. Is the government doing this, do you think, so that in case there's flooding coming again, and likely there will be at some point, they want to minimize the potential for people going after the government for money? The more houses that are built in these areas or in them now, the less chance they can get anything from the government in the event of a flood.
Well, for sure. That was my first reaction, because we know the payouts they probably did in years past. And we're saying, maybe that's their ultimate, goal, is that they want to absolve themselves of any responsibility. They just don't have the funding to do it. Again, I'm one community within many throughout Quebec. Well, we're saying, if that's the case, number one, what are you doing for the residents that are going to have to make that decision, can't get their house mortgage, can't get insurance at an affordable option, and they want to finally leave. What are you going to do for those folks that can't? If the option is for the high-risk areas, let's say you can't do anything to renovate your home or enlarge it, rebuild it. You're not allowed to do that according to the criteria we have already now from this map. So what happens to a 60, 70-year-old home, which is often the case along these older areas, that need to be rebuilt or somebody needs to do some major renovations to expand, whatever? Now they can't do that. So what's their option? To sell. But wait a second, now you can't sell.
Right.
So what's the government going to do for these folks that have been living here for generations? The other thing I didn't mention in the 1800s, what's interesting enough is we have, within the 1800s, we have a fire station, we have a police station, we have a seniors' home, we have schools, we have our public works garage that houses our salt bins, for example. What are you going to do for all these folks that are based in the red zone, in the extreme high risk? And what they're saying is it's free water, right, which is the river overflowing and flooding areas. Well, then how come in my area I have areas that were flooded in 2017, which we temporarily solved, but that are now on the flood map that were the direct result of overflow from the storm sewer system, which has nothing to do with free water, as they claim in this regulation. So, there's a lot of questions that we have. We've submitted, for example, a brief that Montreal will submit before the October 17th date. Again, what's interesting is they've been holding consultations since the beginning of June, something that many people didn't know about. And you know what? They were holding these consultations without any maps. So what are you trying to show then? Or what are you talking about then if you don't have the maps to invite people to see whether they're in that zone or not? Only now do we see the maps, and people have to rush for the next 2 weeks to, respond to or ask any questions.
I will point out, by the way, in the past, so you mentioned the different categories. Now, we only had 2 categories of flood zones, right? 0 to 20 or 20 to 100. That was it.
Right. And the urban plan allowed us to conduct regular day-to-day municipal business according to those 2 factors, of course, using other factors too, but those are the main ones. Now, all of a sudden, they're talking about any of those zones, the probability of flooding within the 25 years. And some of the zones have never flooded in hundreds of years, let alone the next 25 years. And so that to me is a little bit confusing, And so I would ask myself, what is their goal behind this? I think you hit it on the head, Aaron, when you said that the possibility is here. They've paid out for so many years that now they just don't have enough funding. And I'm saying, well, in 2017, when we were I was going back and forth to Quebec, and I was front and center for the flood effort here in Pierrefonds-Roxboro and crisis management. We were talking about putting in permanent structures throughout the territory, not everywhere, but at least in strategic locations. Nobody listened to us. Montreal didn't help us. Quebec didn't help us. The federal government didn't help us. And so now we find ourselves again against the wall trying to fend for ourselves, and we don't have the answers. We've been proactive about this, Aaron. We've contacted the CMM, which is the Metropolitan Montreal Community, and we've asked them. We are holding next week a public information meeting. We will be announcing that within the next day or so. We've already confirmed it with them. I want representatives here in my community. We want to invite the public that is situated within this map so that they can ask the questions that matter to them and hopefully get the answers from these representatives.
And obviously that's great. I will point out, by the way, this has not yet been adopted provincially, right? This is just a plan that's going to be submitted at some point. The idea is to have people know, as you said, that the first consultation, the map seems kind of ridiculous to hold a consultation when you don't know what these maps are going to say. So that was kind of putting the cart before the horse. When is your meeting happening out there?
It's planned for next Thursday evening. And again, we were lucky to be able to mobilize that as quick as possible. We're going to confirm the location, probably one of the local high schools, and it'll also be webcast as well for folks that can't attend. And we'll come up with a system where people can write their questions online. But this is absolutely necessary. We're pressed for time. And the government, you said it, I think they're just washing their hands of it, and they're saying, well, look, now... And my question is, well, it's not about rebuilding here. It's not about creating huge developments. We're talking about how do we protect the people that have been there for many generations, that live in these homes and have lived in these homes for 50, in some cases, 50, 60 years. What do you do for these people now that find themselves in a critical zone, that can't do anything to their properties and are going to have trouble with all that collateral stuff that's happening, not to mention the businesses and all the institutions that I mentioned earlier that will also be affected? throughout the corridor, the center corridor, particularly of my community.
By the way, just as a last note, because we're out of time, I will mention what you said before, right? If you are one of those people living in one of those homes that have been around for a while, if you're in that, high, moderate risk zone, you're not even permitted to demolish your home and rebuild, right? That would be against the law.
That's right. And the only time that you'll be able to do that is if, for example, there's a fire in your home and then you can rebuild it on the same footprint. But, we've always said, and I've always said, there are methods, and there is science behind construction methods that can be built, for example, or reinforced in flood-prone areas. And so if that's one of the options, well, where's the resources that are attached to that to help people make that choice? If I want to waterproof my house and I don't have the means to do it and I'm stuck living in this zone, well, then can somebody help me at least find the funding available so that I can do that to my home because I really want to stay here? I mean, what's the alternative, really? You let them flood, and then what do when they're devastated? So that is very concerning for us, Aaron, as we move forward.
Jim, I got to leave it there. We'll follow up on this, obviously, because this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, not just out where you are, but to many other communities on the West Island, for example, as well. Jim, thanks so much. Appreciate it.